Boss, am I done now? I've been driving for 3 hours. No, I paid $5 to get you in on that race the second it was announced. Not only that, but I also have gotten you starting from pole position.
B1 Bambang, B1, do you have any idea how much trouble did I go through to put you there?
But boss, I was sabotaged. That fake safety car really was uncalled for. The Turks literally got P2 and P3 despite starting from the bottom half. And they went through the same thing.
You, on the other hand,
went from first place to P15. In what world
do you think that's an acceptable result? Now drive!
Hi, it's been a while. For those that are not privy to this challenge, I'll try my best to win the game without buying a single car from the dealership. The catch? This is done from the Randomizer Mod, which obviously shuffles the prize cars won from events. With that had been said, I welcome you back to the world of Gran Turismo. Today, we are going to bring the Celica that was won from the 4-wheel drive challenge to another drivetrain related challenge. As this car has the front-wheel drive, the challenge we would enter with this retro piece of machinery will be the FF challenge. I thought of giving this car a set of soft spots, but you know what? No. If what I've expected from this event is correct, I won't need them. Armed with this bravado, into the challenge I've gone. The first race was set in the Midfield Raceway, an iconic original layout designed for Gran Turismo. Upon launching, I found that this car was suffering from a rather extreme case of wheel spin, truly debilitating. But what to do? Immediately shifting to the second gear like this results in a horrendously long shifting time, which is just as bad as letting the car rip. I know, wanna start from the second gear. That's right, with manual transmission, you can actually start the race from whichever gear that you want. And would you look at that? The car launched off the line just fine, and there were no time required to change gears, as the car had launched off from the second gear. This perfected launch had allowed me to somewhat keep up with the rest from the get-go. I pulled myself back to the fold and went through the traffic right before the first hairpin of the track. On the hairpin itself, I took on the red FTO and dealt with the Taurus through a rather questionable tactic. Whether the FIA would have liked this maneuver or not, this strategy had resulted in an early silver medal. From this point onwards, my only challenge would be outplaying the Peugeot. By turn 4, I noticed that the 206 had more power than my car as it was pulling away on the straights. I controlled my throttle down the big, arching 7th corner to maintain a tight and ideal racing line, kept the momentum going down the curve and remained close to the blue car before me. On the straights, the 206 was on attacking range, but once again, its sheer power saved its trophy from me. Though that did not last long as he had finally made a mistake on the 8th corner. The 206 slowed down. I managed to get myself close once more and challenged the Peugeot down turn 9. With me barely on the track's limits, I fought off the French and finally managed to wrestle P1 away from him. The French foolishly braked early for the 10th corner, which I thought was quite unnecessary, as I managed to go through this corner just fine with significantly less braking. On the long straights, I carefully listened to the Peugeot's Frenchly sounds and deduced his point of attack. I predicted correctly and denied him his first place right before we entered the second and final lap. Right after we made it to the final lap, the 206 tried to launch another attack, but failed as I was able to block him in time. I have to admit, there are many rooms for improvement for this cornering though. As is with most, if not all front-wheel drive cars, they are quite susceptible to understeering, which what happened to my Celica as I rather clumsily took on the hairpin. Around the first checkpoint, I sensed another attempt from the French, but unfortunately, I was too late to block him from re-entering P1. It was a good thing that cornering was still the French's biggest weakness, as I managed to squeeze my way back to my rightful spot. I kept on curbing down the 7th corner to ensure the 206 would be kept at bay, as I thought he would do the same. This time, I have decided to brake hard for the 6th corner and remain on the inside lane throughout the set of corners, a tried-true method which had fended off the furious French again and again. I treated the final 2 corners as a single curve to streamline my approach to the set of corners and optimize my rendition of the third. Then, I prepared myself to play Minister of Defense as I raced down the straights ahead of the 206. But looks like that was unnecessary as the 206 didn't have enough time to reach its attacking range. That was the first win needed to get past this event out of 5. The next race was set in the eastern section of Suzuka Circuit. a small, rather simplistic track that only features the S-curves from the track. Once again, launching off the grid in second gear pretty much perfected my Celica's launch, minimizing the early disadvantage I usually had to come back from, and long before the first corner, I was pretty much had gotten back with the rest of the pack. Though, overtaking related action did not start until around the first corner, where I went for the inside lane and dealt with both the Mazda and the Nissan, getting third place. Oh, there goes the Citroen, along with his chances for a podium finish. Thankfully, the Fiat moved out of the way as I made my way through. After the second place was acquired, it was time to hunt down the Roadster before me. By the fourth corner, the yellow Fiat was taken care of. I controlled my throttle throughout the wavy corners, ensuring the car kept its momentum throughout the alternating corners. Thanks to this technique, I was able to keep my speed throughout the curves. By the final corner of the layout, I have started to build quite the distance. Upon entering the S-curves for the second time, I controlled my throttle down the first set of corners, allowing for an ideal racing line. Then, I curved the first S-curve as well as the second one. On the final curve, I moved the Celica to the ideal position to exit the chain of corners from an advantageous position, which allowed me to take a rather lean lane across the corner. I managed to make that lap in 1 minute and 5 seconds. Let's see if I can break that record on the final lap. I pushed the car full force down the straight line until just after the white line on the asphalt. I slowed down to carefully go through the first few corners of the lap, maintaining my speed on the way. On the S-curves, I maintained a proper throttle control to ensure my racing line is maintained, prevented myself from going off track on the last few S-curves before leaving the corners for the last straight of the lap. In the end, I did break my record, as well as the second victory required to progress through this challenge. The third race was set in Hong Kong, a treacherous street race which features many sharp corners placed in such tight roads. I pulled the switchback maneuver past the Alfa Romeo, yet twitched at the prospect of meeting the guardrail head-on. I recovered pretty quickly and took on the Primera and made it to P4. After a little bit of curbing, I entered the wide, high-speed section of the track. I attempted an overtake on the French car, but unfortunately, the Celica was inferior in terms of speed compared to the 206, which spelled failure for my attempt here. I was much better at cornering though, which has allowed me to slingshot myself up to P3 before the fifth corner. On the rather narrow intermission, I was once again left behind by the Mazda, who clearly had the upper hand in power. Yet, on the sixth corner, the tables were turned. I tried preventing the Mazda from overtaking, but predictably, the Celica was outsped. I decided to compensate through late braking, minimize my throttle down the hairpin, and soon, my attention was set on the Del Sol. I chased the Civic down the long straights and braked roughly 50 meters before turn 8. After a smooth cornering, I managed to cut the distance between me and the current winner of the race, and through taking the inside lane, I have finally managed to overcome the Del Sol. All I had to do then was to drive properly down this layout and defend my position from anyone else. I went too deep on the second hairpin to the point of softly bouncing off the guardrails. Despite its imperfection, I remained on the pole position, almost 2 seconds ahead from the Del Sol. I mustered my courage to flirt with the walls of turn 1 for the optimal racing line, used the curbs to ideally tackle the second corner, and used the same approach for turn 3. This level of optimization allowed me to start creating a noticeable gap between me and the rest of the grid. I slowed my car enough to properly curb over the fifth corner to avoid unwanted airtime. By the second checkpoint, I was 2 seconds ahead of the Del Sol, a good sign of my victory. This gap then was stretched across the long straights, which is quite odd considering the power disadvantage I thought I was suffering from. On the seaside area, I managed to swivel the Celica around, going as close as I was willing to towards the guardrails while maintaining my momentum, as the car had just the right pace for me to go ham on the track. This time, I ensured myself to avoid making contact with the guardrails on the final hairpin and raced to the finish line as fast as I could. In the end, I managed to score yet another win on the Drivetrain Team Challenge. The fourth race was set on yet another Gran Turismo original, Grand Valley East. Another grid start, meaning my car would be put at a disadvantage as it's not exactly the best at launching. However, like before, I'll manage. On the first corner, I took on the outside lane to handle the Vectra. After gaining P5, my sights were on the FTO. I tried to reduce wind resistance through tailgating, but apparently, the FTO was also too powerful for my old Celica as it pulls away almost immediately. In response, I dive bombed the Mitsubishi on the fourth corner. While questionable, this maneuver worked wonders, as it had placed me on before. The Eclipse did not last long on the podium, as I made my overtake before the apex of the next corner and gave the Citroen quite a jump scare by turn 6. I made sure to let the Citroen driver knew of his mistakes by braking late before the hairpin and overtook him as I was as deep as I could in the inner lane of the hairpin. In the tunnel, I went past the second checkpoint, which showed that I was only half a second earlier than the Citroen, signaling that I still would need to keep my guard up to ensure that the Citroen does not get a chance to make a comeback. I grazed the curbs down the 9th corner and for a moment understeer stroked my Celica. While it barely affected my driving, I would have been lying if I said that did not give me a bit of shock therapy. After a smooth turning experience down the 10th corner, I made my way to the final lap, a second earlier than the Citroen. By the second lap, I properly slowed down for the first hairpin, quickly launched off the corner and into the first checkpoint, and looks like the Eclipse had made his move and claimed second place. On the second hairpin, I opted for a rather forceful method, initiating a small slide to help the car turn. This managed to generate momentum for me to launch off onto the tunnels in record time. By the second checkpoint, I was practically running circles around the Eclipse with that glorious sub 3 seconds advantage. I kept my pace throughout the 8th corner, going as far as introducing some of my wheels onto the greenery decorating this fine track, and thought I could get away on turn 9 without changing gears. However, I was too late to save myself as the car had already left the good tarmac. Lucky for me, I was still able to pull myself back onto the correct path before the others caught up and pushed my car full force to the finish line. The last race for this challenge was set in an actual real-world track, Twin Ring Motegi. Fitting for the last event I'll tackle to complete the event, it has the highest A-spec points. In my opinion, this is accurate as it houses the big shots from the previous events. We have the red Eclipse from the last event on the pole position, as well as the 206, who gave me quite a trouble back in midfield raceway. However, I was unfettered and drove on. On the first corner, I managed to rise up from the disadvantage and cut my distance with the Citroen. I have to admit, my rendition of this corner was quite rough, with the Celica ended up outside of the track limits. However, this did not change the fact that the Citroen was a mere moments away from being outraced. And, like opposite ends of magnetic force, I pulled myself closer towards the Piscio. I wasted no time to take the 206's position. This, however, might have been controversial, as I did have to make a little corner cut to make this overtake work. On the straight section, I noticed something horrifying. The Eclipse had begun to make a massive lead over the rest of the grid, displaying a sheer difference in power between them and myself. From how I managed to launch faster than the Prelude, looks like that was all it took for me to fix this problem. Lo and behold, a normal Lupo is actually in the event, an actual production version of the Volkswagen Lupo, instead of that absolute cheating maniac with his Lupo Cup car in Gran Turismo 3. On the 10th turn, I decided to take the middle lane to overtake the Lupo. Then, my problem would be catching the red Eclipse in time before the short race ends. That would seem to be a tall order though, as once again, the Eclipse proved to have more power than my Celica. On the straights, the red Mitsubishi managed to gap me once again. I felt the Lupo's intentions and decided to move in to defend myself. The last thing I needed from this rather precarious situation was being blown back to third. I decided to take the first corner on third gear, as I needed all the speed I could muster to catch up to this menace. Ironically, the Celica oversteered. I had to spend quite the time getting this car back on its best behavior. Truth to be told, this was quite puzzling, as I had always thought front-wheel drive cars are quite resistant towards this phenomenon. But if I were to win, I would have to shake these feelings off as soon as possible and do better on the other corners to overtake the Eclipse. On the 6th corner, I have finally gotten close to the Eclipse. I was so close to greatness. I was very close of winning the entire race. On the last and half of the final lap remained, but that was no reason to surrender. On the 9th corner, I made contact with the Eclipse, signing his eventual downfall on this race. Upon exiting that corner, I managed to actually tailgate that red car and brake late on the 10th corner. Finally, first place. Not for long though, as late braking like that has its consequences. The Eclipse managed to launch off faster and retake his crown. My only chance then was the final corner. It was all or nothing. I bravely dive bombed the Eclipse on turn 11. I roughly bumped the Eclipse aside. While some might think that this was an illegal move, I say it's a revolutionary tactic which had finally gotten me P1. Focused entirely on defending my position down the final straight to not render all this hard work null and void. At last, I have finally managed to win the final race required to clear this challenge. After a surprisingly tough race, it was time for my rightful reward, which had taken the form of... That's something I'd never seen before. What do I even do with this car? I mean, don't get me wrong, it looks okay, but... is it really what I was looking for? Well, not for now anyways. I instead opted for the 350Z, which I have won from attaining all silver medals from the national A license tests. And looks like I could take on yet another drivetrain themed event with this car, the FR Challenge. Filled with cars that typically has dangerously high power and dangerously low control, this challenge will truly test the driver's skills. With that had been said, into the challenge I've gone. The first race was set in the United States of America, specifically Seattle. I streamlined the first chicane, allowing me to enter under the highway faster. Upon exiting the corner, I immediately shifted lanes to take on the 300Z. However, as I incidentally rammed the M Coupe before me, I figured that I could have timed my brakes better. Nevertheless, that was before in the bag. Next on the list was the Skyline. Practically a G35 in Nissan clothing. Through a tighter cornering, I managed to outdo the Skyline and claim P3. I managed to outdo both the Not 35 and the actual G35 and reach second place. This helped me in keeping up to the Z32, who had started to gap the rest of the grid on the straights. This time, I do not suffer from the power disadvantage and could actually pull myself closer to the opposing fair lady. To keep most of my speed, I opted to go wide, fully send the car across the corner, and eventually overpower the Z32 before the sharp right corner at the end of this high-speed section. I controlled my throttle through turn 7 to avoid wheel spin, and on the 8th corner, I have started to build a considerable gap against my rivals. I hit the apex at the end of this corner, allowing me to keep my momentum going and embrace the downhill section after nailing the apex of turn 9. As my car made leaps and bounds, I noticed the advantage I have had become quite obscene. Upon this realization, I decided to send the car through, keeping the lead and speed throughout the race. With blazing speeds, I completed the first lap in under 2 minutes. Once again, I took on the chicane as optimal as I could, kept a watchful eye on my speed down turn 2. Down the larger chicane, I used the curves as points of reference to determine my racing line. This managed to tremendously help. I grazed the curbs as I made my way down the set of alternating corners without losing much of my momentum. Upon entering the straights, I was apparently 10 seconds ahead from the other fair lady. Maybe I could take the rest of the race easy and appreciate other things this mod had brought, such as the vastly improved sound this car produces. Pure orchestra. In my opinion, this is the biggest improvement the Randomizer Mod has brought to this timeless game. At the end of this high-speed section, I slowed down, properly identified the apex, and turned accordingly. With lowered tension, I could properly navigate through turn 8. Once again, the curves helped a lot in finding the apex point of each turn. Oddly enough, on the 9th corner, the car seemed to have issues in turning. I would assume it was due to the sudden change of elevation, causing the front tires to barely grasp the ground beneath them and making it harder for the Z to make that turn. I braked around 50 meters from the 10th corner, made it through the corner properly, and tackled the final hairpin with a proper throttle control. On the final straight, I pushed the Z hard and managed to finish first, recording the first win in the FR Challenge. The second round was set in Tsukuba Circuit. As this track is quite small, we have 3 laps instead of the usual 2. On the first corner, I decided to take a wider lane as the inside had been populated by a yellow Mazda RX-8. With zero fuss, I launched off the corner and claimed P5. Before turn 4, a small error in judgment caused the 300C to be swept aside. To a bit unfair, I had to take what I had gotten, or at least that's what I thought to justify myself as I made my way past the corner. Late braking allowed me to overtake the S13 before me, claiming second place. My attention then was on the seemingly dominant S14 Sylvia. With the sheer power of my Z33, I powered myself through the distance, and by the 7th corner, I've closed in on the Sylvia. I opted for a rather odd racing line, which actually was the better choice as seen from how I managed to launch off the corner faster than the Sylvia. Right at the start of the straights, I have managed to claim P1 off my opponent. This is where I put all 6 of the 350Z's cylinder to maximum work, powering through the speed section and started gapping the rest of the competition by the final corner of this rather simplistic layout. That was lap 1, done in 1 minute and 12 seconds. On the second lap, I ensured the car go through the proper method of cornering, controlled my throttle to avoid unnecessary wheel spin, and kept a textbook racing line down the sharp right. I tried to attempt the second and third corners in a relatively straight line, and kept a balanced approach throughout turn 4. These efforts helped tremendously in solidifying my lead over my rivals through a significant gap. I made my way through the 6th corner full force, as I believed my 350Z had what it takes to pull off such a maneuver, and did it do just that gracefully. I have to admit I was taken a little aback as I went wider than expected on the hairpin. I proceeded to shake off this paper mentality and got it down on the long straights and controlled my throttle down the wide final corner. Lap 2 was done 5 seconds faster than the first one. Now, let us see if I could become even faster on the final lap. On turn 1, things were already not looking so great. I hit the gas as soon as the corner was over, shook off my displeasure, and took on the next couple of corners in a rather optimized way. This allowed me to take on turn 4 from an advantageous point, gave me more maneuvering platform to keep more of my momentum throughout this corner. 7 seconds ahead of the Sylvia, I had pretty much won. But this time, the goal was to crack my personal best. Therefore, I did not lower my pace and instead kept on driving as hard as before. I sped past the 6th corner with my car's full power, slowed down just in time for the hairpin, and after properly cornering past the corner, I left the rest of the grid in the dust as my 350Z showed its sheer power on the unfettered straights. I carefully went past the final corner, and in the end, I managed to reach the finish line in 1 minute and 6 seconds, a second faster than the previous lap, not to mention the second victory required to progress through the challenge. The next race might be my favorite in this event out of the venue alone. The beautiful street racing scene in Midnight, Spatial Stage Route 5. Inside the tunnel, I took the second lane to remain close towards the inner side of the corner, while avoiding traffic which had occupied the innermost lane. This decision had allowed me to not only outpower the Mercedes, but also overtake the Z4 in the process, earning me 2 places. Right around turn 4, I denied the Sylvia his racing line, along with his place on the podium. I have also politely asked the yellow Mazda to move aside as I made my way to P2. Surprisingly, a Skyline has made its way onto the challenge, but that was no GTR, no. This is in fact a GTST, a rather slower rear-wheel drive variant of the GTR we all know and love. While that might have been an interesting trivia, my 350Z couldn't care less, as it powered its way through this not GTR, claiming P1, and immediately I left the green Skyline in the dust. I braked in time to handle the hairpin and took on the corner as tight as this 350Z could, which went through pretty well in my opinion. This decent performance had allowed me to extend the gap and strengthen the dominance I have on this race. The second checkpoint was through, and apparently, I've been leading the race by more than 3 seconds compared to the rest. From the looks of it, that was it. Unless I spin out or get stuck to a wall, the chances of them making any sort of comeback are pretty much null and void. In the tunnel, I made good use of the innermost lane as this time, there were no traffic in my way. This tighter lane has allowed me to process the corner faster than before. A similar approach was used down turn 4, where I sacrificed speed in the name of a better racing line. Unfortunately though, this near-perfect stride was stopped by my own hubris as I entered turn 7 too fast for my own good, causing a nasty smash to the walls. In response, I braked and forced the car to avoid the walls on the left side, and after I calmed myself down from such a shocking event, I went for the ideal lane down turn 8. On the hairpin, I ensured the ideal level of speed as I maintained a tight lane, which was ideal for dealing with such a sharp turn. I went a bit brave and powered through turn 12, a bit risky, but in the end, I have managed to take the brief corner cleanly. On the chicane, I aimed to take this set of corners with as little turning as possible to maintain my speed down this section of the track. Smoothly entered the final turn of the track 10 seconds ahead of the non-GTR and used all of the car's power to bring about a speedy end to this race. These efforts had given me quite the easy win. That's 92 A-spec points and some cash in the wallet, and more importantly, the third victory required to clear this challenge. The next race was set in Laguna Seca, a rather small track which serves as the penultimate challenge to the completion of this event. While driving down the first corner, I noticed that the Z4 widened out. As the beamer gave out, I aimed the car towards the inner lane with hairpin and managed to climb P5 before leaving turn 2. The S2000 made a fatal mistake of braking way too early to tackle turn 3. This mistake had given me yet another position on a silver platter. The first checkpoint was through, and apparently, the crossfire was almost 4 seconds away from me and my 350Z. Considering this is a rather small track, and we only have 2 laps in this race, the order of cutting down this tremendous gap was quite tall. If I were to win, I had to play aggressive. We battled it out bumper to bumper across the straights, bridging the 5th corner to turn 6, and in the end, my Z33 proved to be faster, as I have finally managed to reach P2. While a joyous occasion, that was not the end of my fight in this race, as the crossfire was much ahead of me. Things looked grim as the gap remained despite me putting maximum throttle down the Rahal straight. I used the markers on the track's side to take on the renowned corkscrew, of course, while still respecting the boundaries of the track, out of sheer gentlemanliness. I might be coping, but I did feel my car was getting closer towards the crossfire after I left the famed chicane. I sent my car past the 9th corner, and upon exiting the curve, I was certain that I have made progress in my quest to beat the crossfire. Once again, my overzealous self had caused me to brake way too late, causing a painfully similar crash against the white crossfire. And like before, it barely did anything, and yet, I was able to launch off the corner faster, and after all of that, I have finally managed to climb all the way to the top. Of course, the crossfire tried to retake his crown by sheer power, by a slight defensive move thwarted his plans as I entered the Andretti hairpin first. A perfect racing line down turn 2 was made, and immediately after, the future of this race turned bright. All I had to do from that point was to drive properly and not pin the car to the sand. Upon entering the 5th corner, the tables had been completely turned as the crossfire was lagging behind in comparison to my 350Z. I ensured the car followed through the ideal racing line down the corner. I sent my car through turn 6, keeping both the line and the momentum past the corner, ensuring my dominance over this race well maintained through fast, proper driving. I was overjoyed at the prospects of leaving the rest of my rivals in the dust. Of course, I did not forget to brake in time to handle the corkscrew, which I did with elegance and more importantly, within the track's limits. 5 seconds was my advantage as I made my way past the 10th corner. I gauged my speed perfectly and correctly timed my cornering, resulting in a fast yet safe experience throughout this corner. Once I left the rather sharp turn, I put the hammer down and sped towards the finish line. This is it, the last push required to etch yet another win into record books. And another win I've gotten, as my car rolled across the finish line in first place. The final race of the FR Challenge was set on an original track called Motorland. As this track is very small, us participants were told to make 4 laps to finish the race. I thought, fair enough, and rolled off to the starting line after everyone else. On the first corner, the red Silvia proved to be easy prey, as I gained a position by simply braking. The little M Coupe thought he could do something about the traffic, but backed out at the very last second in fear of contact. Once again, fair enough. I hit the gas and took P4, avoided touching grass and took a linear lane past the 3rd corner. On turn 5, I practically dive bombed into P3. I made it through and followed the FC and politely asked him to step aside, giving me the silver medal. But 2nd place is not a win in my book, no. Only P1 matters in this here game. I wouldn't be able to claim the prize right and tick this off the checklist otherwise. Around the wide half-circle turn, me and my Z was slowly but surely cutting down the distance between us and the Beamer. He was too late to react as the overtake had already been done, but apparently, he tried shoving me off the track and into the grass. I was able to get things back under control. From that point on, however, the objective for me was no longer to simply win, but to run absolute circles around that rat bastard. This time, I didn't need the first gear to make my way through turn 5, as there was no dive bombing done. I properly took myself around the corner and prioritized caution down turn 7. Around the 8th corner, I made sure the car stayed on the tarmac, and thanks to these efforts, I have managed to end the 2nd lap in roughly 47 seconds. And the rat bastard lagging behind. I have gotten what I came for in this race, yet I still have 2 laps left. It was then that I have decided to dedicate the remaining laps for self-improvement. I went for the inside past turn 3, which allowed me to take on the 4th corner in a relatively straight line. I slowed the car down by a significant margin to handle the 5th corner, banking it all on a fast launch of the corner, which I absolutely was capable of doing, as the technique allowed for more room to move as I left the corner. The same technique was used to tackle the 7th corner. I used what I perceived as the best racing line for my situation, slowed the car down enough for it to execute my plan, and we went off that curve with great acceleration. This style of driving had allowed me to improve my lap time. By the final lap, I was aiming to improve this even further. By the 1st corner, I thought I could optimize my time across the section by going even deeper, but apparently, I went too deep and touched grass instead, On the second corner, I kept the idea of tackling on this set of turns in a relatively straight line in mind as I made my way past the third corner, utilizing the curves as pointers to the apex points. On the fifth corner, I controlled my throttle. I remained cautious upon exiting the corner as an equally treacherous curve was waiting for me. I used a racing line that allows me to link turns 6 and 7 together for a streamlined, optimal cornering down these corners. I was hoping that driving in this manner would help me regain time lost from the little mistake on the first corner. Unfortunately, that was not enough as I failed to break the record on the final lap. Well, at least I still won, which was what actually the more important aspect of this result. The ever challenge was finally through, and now for my reward. Yo, what? No way! Okay, full transparency, I was expecting something mid, given the last few cars that I've gotten, but this had blown my expectations out of the water. In a run where I'm only allowed to use prize cars, I have found exactly two concerns. Concern number one, a pickup to tackle the sports truck race. The game only has 5 cars eligible for this event. With the randomizer, the midget is also legal for that race, but still, that only makes 6 cars eligible out of 721 cars. Which means that the chances for me to win a car that's legal for this race is 0.8%. If you ask me, this figure is quite concerning. Concern number 2, a car fast enough to handle the World Championship. While I know technically you can race in the World Championship in an even road legal FD, but I'm nowhere skilled enough to pull off something like that. So for me, I need a real race car capable to take on the LMPs awaiting in that event. And let's see, we have probably 10 cars that can comfortably compete in that event, which means the chances of landing us an LMP tier car in a run like this would be 1.4%, quite low in my opinion. But now, I can safely say that concern number 2 was done and dealt with. I mean, this Escudo has more power than a Minolta, yet lighter than a Wagon R. Even stock, I'm sure this car got what it takes to take on the World Championship itself. But one thing for sure, winning this car is one heck of a way to end this video. Will we win a pickup to deal with the remaining big concern? Or will we have to absolutely start a scavenger hunt for one of these elusive big boys? We shall find out next time. You're still here? Well, does this mean you need more videos to watch? In that case, I got you covered.